There's a lot of misnomers or misunderstandings about asylum life in the 19th century. The whole image of the sort of satanic, sort of dark, gothic asylum, which we get from 1970s horror films, etc. Now, there were abuses that took place in asylums, and sometimes were better or worse than others. But in general, they are not dark, evil, dank places. They're actually very well run. People are cared for. And so, to begin with, let's think about how you end up in the asylum in the first place. And I think, again, there are a bit of misunderstandings here. People kind of think you just get carted off. Someone's raving insane, or we want to get rid of your aunt, or for the classic example of royal family putting a member away because it's a bit inconvenient sort of behaviour or whatever. In fact, it was a very bureaucratic process to get someone into an asylum. They weren't just carted off. You needed certification by 2 doctors, for example. It's a bit more complex than that, depending whether you're a private or in a sense, going to a private asylum or a public asylum. But anyway, it's a bureaucratic process. It takes time and requires a lot of paperwork, which is all checked through and very thorough. So you don't just get carted off. People are interviewed. The people who are suggesting your friends or family, say if you're the person who's going to the asylum, your friends and family have to give evidence, which is written down, testimony as to the behaviour of why it is that they think that their family member or friend is insane. The superintendent of the asylum on the reception has to ensure that all the paperwork is correct, and sometimes they'll send the paperwork back because they're saying the doctors haven't given us enough evidence here. So it is a bureaucratic process, and some people probably decided not to send friends and family to the asylum because of the paperwork itself. Another perhaps misnomer is the idea of people being stuck in asylums for life. Yes, there were people who spent decades in asylums. These were people who were also very seriously ill. But in fact, a majority of people spent brief spells in the asylum. Sometimes just a couple of weeks, sometimes a few months. That is the normal experience for someone in an asylum. Some people end up going back and forth, so they'll be in 4 or 5, 6 times in the course of their life. But in general, people went in, they were considered to be cured after a week or a couple of months, and they were let out again and back into normal life. So that is the majority experience. As to treatment in the asylum, we often associate asylums, 19th century asylums, with straitjacket, restraint, physical restraint, and padded cells. And yes, straitjackets, restraints were used in the 19th century asylums, but they were actually used rather sparingly. The profession itself didn't like talking about it very much because there was lots of criticisms about the use of restraints. And some asylum attendants wrote papers saying, well, look, this is how we use a straitjacket. We use it very rarely. We only use it in extremely violent cases, and normally only for a few hours during whatever fit that someone was suffering from. So the idea that someone sits in a cell day after day in a straitjacket is largely myth. It comes from films and media and misunderstandings again. As to life in the asylum, again, we often think of them being incarcerated like a prison, Actually, asylums were much more benign than that, and because one of the key treatments for asylum patients, which was written about extensively, was about relaxation, about calming people who were suffering from mental health issues. And so they put on lots of activities. In fact, and asylums they would organise day trips. There would be picnics. There's regular sports and activities. There, people will be working, learning crafts, or in the garden, for example, farm work, labouring. They're all working and labouring. They're not just sitting all day in rooms, isolated from each other. This is a vibrant community that's going on here, and leisure is a key part of the asylum life. And daily life itself, it varied from asylum to asylum in the quality, but people, historians have studied the daily dietary regimes and the menus, because all this is published. Every asylum has to have an annual report, which is then handed over to government inspectors, and as part of those annual reports they have to provide accounts and justify how much is spent on food and what sort of food and where the food is coming from and all those sorts of things. And so we do know the dietary regimes of life in an asylum, and for some people it was probably the best meals they've had for a long time. For others it would be poorer. It depends what your background is, the poverty levels and where you come from, urban or rural, and those sorts of things. But you get a steady, regular meal in a daily life. Again, as I say, there's plenty of activities going. You do work. You work while you're in the asylum, unless you're very, very physically ill. There's a community. People talk to each other. People obviously have a relationship with the medical officers and nurses as well on this, and that sometimes can be tricky. Well, again, like today, you'll get good and bad medical officers and nurses. Or some maltreatment did happen. Others were very good and conscientious as well. So let's not think of the asylum as a prison per se.